All right. Erik, good to see you.
Good to see you, Caspar. Thanks for having me.
We go back a while. I think I was your first intern. Fair to say that?
Indeed.
I was one
Yes.
intern.
Well, one of the first.
Exactly. And that was 15 years ago.
Yes.
A wonderful startup in Berlin. Um, but since then, you've been focusing on the logistics industry. You have a little bit of a history there. And so today we want to talk about how you've spent almost a decade, I think, at this point, really thinking about how to take the status quo of the industry and bring it to structure and platformization. And you've done that through different things. Maybe we can start by you just describing where you're coming from. And then I would love to walk through the status quo that you found and how you've gradually learned to understand that industry and how you're transforming it and how you have been transforming this over the last years. But let's start with a quick introduction from your end.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, this year it's I think 10 years that I'm working in logistics, more specifically even in freight forwarding, which means moving things around the world on an airplane or on a vessel that's larger than a parcel, than a shoebox. Um, it goes back to me being co-founder of a company called Forto in 2015, where we had been looking into logistics for a while because we were curious about how digitalization would shape that market. And we felt that it was rather odd that there was very little, a very low degree of digitalization in the industry in 2015. So to make that very concrete, there were transport management systems, but a really fair share of the market was still using AS400 green screen systems with people saying, hey, that's a fantastic system. I can just hotkey really fast through my customs submission here. And we were thinking, let's build software to help freight forwarders on the one side be more productive, and on the other side deliver better customer service because they can provide more visibility, maybe a self-service portal. At that time, you already, of course, booked an Uber via an app, ordered other business services online. And with freight forwarding, that just wasn't the prevalent situation. We built the first version of our software, tried to sell it to freight forwarders, but we had basically one um, owner of a big freight forwarder say, "Hey, boys, go back to Berlin. This is a people business. Digitalization doesn't make sense here." And that was us thinking, okay, well, if the industries, and there was a maybe that was an actual quote, but also in a way, sort of the average of what we heard at that time. And so we thought, okay, if the people in the industry don't believe digitalization will happen or will reshape the business, we should just become a freight forwarder and do it ourselves. And so much easier said than done. So we built a freight forwarding company. We started to ship containers, air freight from A to B in the beginning for Amazon Marketplace sellers, small customers that were digitally native. We had an online platform for them where you could get quotes, book a shipment. We digitalized many processes in the background, and I did that for almost 10 years. We were close to 1,000 people when I left 1.5 years ago and handed over my operational responsibilities. And I think maybe as an intro also to, I guess, our discussion, one last thing I want to say, these 10 years in logistics, I felt I'm on the one side proud about what we achieved, but on the other side, I also have to say, especially when it comes to automating processes, structuring workflows, organizing data, it felt many times like pushing a stone uphill. And still today, so much crucial data lives in Excel sheets, Word files, emails, because it's a heavily fragmented industry. No freight forwarder owns trucks in China, trucks in Europe, terminals, vessels, airplanes. You have to work with others around the world. And everyone just loves to communicate via email also because there's lots of things that go wrong. The Houthis shoot their rockets and you have to divert the ships. There's a port congestion in Hamburg. Customs wants to inspect the goods. You need to unload them in a bonded warehouse. The customer calls you. Everything is organized and says, "Hey, I need to have the goods one day later. Our warehouse is full. You need to reorganize everything. The trucker is not available, etc., etc." So in a way, that's still how the industry works. Yeah, it's fascinating sometimes to see how everything around us, probably 80% has been in a container, still arrives.
Yeah, that's crazy. I saw a post on you that you made on LinkedIn announcing how things are going at your new company, and I think you said the size of the logistics industry in comparison to the GDP is enormous, right?
Yes, 10% almost, I think 9%, which
Crazy.
is, you're an economist, so it just means in every euro we spend, you pay 10 cents to logistics because most of the things we buy are goods and then they've been transported from somewhere to somewhere else.
Yeah, it's a massive problem. And the thing that makes logistics particularly interesting from a platform engineering perspective is that, and you just mentioned this, you have these unforeseen situations where you probably still need, let's call it, as sort of as hopefully AI natives at this point, the human will remain in the loop for a while. Which means, is it fair to say that you have a situation where the human steers the process, but will hand off to specialized systems and other things and store data somewhere? Is that something that resembles what you're seeing on the ground? Like, how do you think about essentially turning a freight forwarder that has done that for centuries probably into something that is able to associate the data, come up with structured processes and all of that? How is that? How do you where do you start? How do you do that?
And that's a very good question. I think it is very, very hard to say where AI will take us over the next 5 years, I think. If the scaling laws continue like they continue at the moment, then you might get significantly more intelligent models that can solve even more complex classes of problems almost perfectly, and that means probably autonomously. If we, and there's some bosses in the market as well, don't continue like this, then maybe there's a smaller share of things where AI can run processes completely autonomously, and you need to have a higher degree of human in the loop. I think down the road, what we imagine is that yes, an operator is still, or like a human rather, is still in the loop. And is still at the high level orchestrating the process, but not each single process individually, but is rather maybe an orchestrator that sits in a control tower. And AI will try, AI agents, AI workflows, however you want to call it, an AI workforce will try to do as much autonomously as possible. And if there is situations where the system cannot autonomously move on, or there's exceptions, or there's the stereotypical container that falls off the ship, which doesn't happen as often as people say, but let's say 800 times a year, just for this example, maybe in that case, haven't trained an AI system to handle that situation, and you'll just take a really smart, really good, high ownership human who will sort of then creatively, as in with human intelligence and creativity, to drive such a process, solve those processes. Today, we start with more discrete use cases and don't fully solve the end-to-end journey yet, just because, as you say, you have to start somewhere. And so what we do is automatically create quotes, accept orders, check them for completeness, check documents, check whether they make sense, automate tons of data entry stuff, etc. And what we're seeing is, to our earlier point of how much is the human involved, already today, November 2025, you have intelligence saturation for a set of small and mid-level tasks where you really don't need a human anymore because the error margin that the AI model has on the problem is probably 5 to X smaller, so almost an order of magnitude than what a human does. And so then you clearly take an AI model. And that's true for all the data entry stuff, clearly. And whereas there's other classes of problems, like really complex quotations, which in sea and air freight are rather complex because it has like trucking in China and Europe and customs clearance, and you need to check a bunch of things. There, you probably want to have a human in the loop, still today.
So is it fair to say if we look at the yeah, in this case, very particular value stream from the customer orders, I want this container shipped from Beijing to Hamburg, and
Yeah,
the container arrives and the customer is happy. That's a
yeah,
clear value stream with a clear outcome. My
yeah.
customer wants something, and then in the end, it's still delivered. Um, do you is it correct to say that you essentially have that human supervising that value stream, and the human needs specific things and requests to systems, essentially paths that the human can follow to then do specific things? Can you describe such a value stream and where you're essentially slotting in capabilities?
Yeah, that's a very good question. That's very good point. So how does it work at the moment? I think the right user experience is being figured out, but how it works at the moment is the following. Maybe you are, let's say you're Caspar, you work at a freight forwarder called Meridian Freight. That doesn't really exist, but I always use that company for demo purposes. So you're Caspar, you work at Meridian Freight, and you're in the sea freight team. And so you get a request from a customer saying, hey, Caspar, can you give me up-to-date rates for the next month from these origins to these destinations? Please sea freight 20-foot and 40-foot high cube containers. And then, in the past, what you have to do is, do I know Caspar? Do we serve these trade lanes? Do I ship these goods? Then, first of all, that's more like I check a bunch of things. Then, do I have everything I need to create a quotation? Maybe I'm missing addresses, I'm missing other information. Then you need to find the prices. You need to check, do I have trucking prices in China for this or at wherever the origin is? Mostly it's, of course, Asia. Do I have destination side, local trucking charges? Do I know what the ship or the air freight rate is? Do I need to offer customs as well? If I don't have it, where do I get it from? And so it's actually quite a heavy process to organize that. And now in the future, you basically just hand over that email to your AI colleague. We call that sort of an AI co-pilot or AI colleague. You forward that, and then that sort of AI will take over the job and might tell you, hey, something is missing, we need this, we need that, or could even on behalf of yours send an email back to the customer that you can decide if you want to still review it, or then you just get a draft in your inbox and you can review it, send it out, or you automatically send it out. And then the AI takes over the job. And most of the times, our customers choose that they do a final review before the quote gets sent out. Sometimes because they want to do a sanity check. Maybe they know something specific about this customer where they say, hey, honestly, they ship, I don't know, really high value items. Let's say solar panels. Let's just add 20% more markup. Yeah. Or you might want to add hey and say hi to your children, yeah, to give it a bit of a human touch, because this is in the end still sort of also, I think, an enterprise sales environment, and that's why humans often review it. We have other customers where they say, hey, it's a bit more anonymous. It's more like especially in Asia, fast turnaround. They accept that there's a 1% error rate, maybe, yeah, but they just prefer to send quotes really, really quickly because that's more an advantage.
Okay, so if we now think about this value stream, zooming in, that's sort of the substream of I have an order coming in, I am creating that, and then I'm responding to this, and it's again the human orchestrating, collecting the information, intersecting with the systems underneath, and then once that order stream is done with the final outcome, the user has an order, we're moving on to the next value stream of, okay, let's book this thing now, reach out to some sort of third-party system to book a truck that's going
Yeah,
from some very large Asian city to Beijing, and then
exactly.
and that again is that that stream is again the human against some sort of third-party system. Is that a good way of thinking about it?
Exactly, right. What you're mentioning, the booking step, is exactly like always is always the same thing. I think in freight forwarding, it's particularly interesting and fits your model really well because it's very often you see a request. You often work triggered by emails. A customer sends a booking, customer sends a request, a ship's coming late, someone's confirming something, and then you do something based on that. And I think what I noticed at Forto is very often people know what to do. The execution, the typing, the entering it in a system, that takes a lot of time. But the decision itself, I think humans are mostly really, really good at, but the execution really also takes time.
Okay, makes sense. Right. So then it actually fits really well into this platform model of saying, hey, in the end, the user is consuming a platform with capabilities and they need the platform in a certain situation. The platform offers paths that they can take, like it's the order booking path, it's the request prices path, it's the give me a truck from city A to city B. And you are offering interfaces and capabilities that augment those humans and do
Yes.
all of the nitty-gritty work, allowing the human to then actually focus on the value-adding thing that the human is good at, which is taking decisions, making sure to read signals correctly, and then handing over. So do you think freight forwarders should think about the process itself as a product? Because, and I'm saying this because I've just looked at, Henry Ford, for instance. Like, what was the key thing that
Mhm.
Henry Ford delivered? He didn't come up with a combustion engine, right? Like he didn't invent assembly work really. But what made him so special is that he took a step back and he said, well, the artisanal way of building a car, right, takes 100 hours, leads to tribal knowledge, it leads to codependencies, it needs to low degrees of standardization, all of those things. Let's take a step back. Let's actually understand that the process of manufacturing
100%.
a car in itself is a product which we need to iterate on, which we need to enhance all the time. Do you
I mean,
think freight forwarders should think about this way?
look, I mean, they're thinking about this definitely since 20 years, massively as a product already.
Hmm.
However, only in the real world, how things get done versus what someone thinks of what the ideal process is a very, very different reality. So in historically, you have the situation that you have global process teams, a global head of process excellence, logistics excellence, global BPM, something like that. And they draw these nice charts, with these great BPMN tools. And you can, if you really like it, you put them as a tapestry on your wall and they can easily fit like a 500 square meter house. But then, when you go into the engine room, most people, I would say, don't do it like that. Sometimes now when I have customers, and I work with someone like who has that function, and we do a shadowing of what the operations people do. They get shocked by how little the process is being followed. I interviewed myself still at Forto when we tried to build an automation around delivery of containers from the port to the customer on the final mile, basically what we consider the final mile. I interviewed customers, I interviewed operations clerks that we had, and one person said, I always schedule the truck first, and then I ask the customer if they have time. Another person said, I always ask the customer first whether they want to have the container, and then I schedule the truck. And the third person would do it even differently. And I said, why do you do it like that? I was like, that's how I always did it. I mean, that's how it's being done. Another person, that's how I learned it. And so there's usually, a lot of personal interpretation for the process. Also, because there was not necessarily, if it works, there wasn't necessarily a need to follow the process. I think the future will be very different. Why? Because in the future, we will do more things with AI, and AI will follow a process, not a super hard-coded process like in the old no-code, low-code days where everything had to be almost a Turing complete deterministic graph. I think it just doesn't work for an industry like freight forwarding or logistics because things are much more dynamic. But still, what I realized today when we roll out our product is you need to think really in detail about your process because this time there is actually a workforce, quote unquote, which takes your process and executes it, right? It's not that you hire someone and you tell them this is how you should do it. And if they do it differently, but they get the job done, it's great. And this time it will really be taken. And that's a massive opportunity, but it's also a big risk if you don't understand the details. And what we realize is that there are some customers who have a high degree of process excellence and some not. And then for them, I think it will be more challenging to go through the AI transformation. I think there's ways to bridge that through systems that learn themselves. But I think the bottom line is the process becomes much more important in the future because things get more centralized with AI, because obviously AI relies more on a single template that can still be highly individualized to customers, but still, rather a single template than swarm intelligence.
Well, and you're solving something that I think has consistently been the problem in artisanal setups. But I would frame that as the external effects problem. So I flew 4 or 5 times to Las Vegas last year, not because I like gambling, because of all of the
You
conferences,
like tank
which is
driving.
sort of exactly, which is great for me, great for the companies that I work for, but it's sort of terrible for the planet. So sort of typical external effects situation. What affects what's good for the individual doesn't necessarily need to be good for the organization, and we're seeing this all the time in these setups. Like there are these process maps, so congratulations. But for the individual, they don't really care about standardization. They don't really care about causing a couple €100 of loss. That's okay for them, right? But it's still terrible externally for the organization. So, and that's obviously something that in the age of agents and in the age of well-crafted platforms, you don't have that problem anymore because the agent is essentially paid by the organization and there is no external effect going on. So I'm like, sure that that's going to be like a wild change. Before we go into the social implications,
Mm.
what's the one of the things that I, for instance, observe in the IT industry, where all of that platform engineering thing originated, is that the productive use of something like AI, or pretty much any process, human driven or agent driven, is directly dependent on how well the backend systems are designed. Like if you don't have an API interface to your data, right, you probably have more problems than if there's well documented
Mm.
systems that agents can act on and humans know how to use, and the paths are designed in a way of leading to standardization by design. It's the least uncomfortable thing for agent or human is to follow that thing because it's designed that way. Do you see that
Yeah.
as well? Like, how do you make sense of all of those disintegrated systems and data sets that you just
Super
described?
good question. Incredibly good question and very important topic. I think that in general, you're right. I think if today you still haven't arrived at an organization, any kind of industry, where your systems are open to be connected by third-party systems, or you are very old school from a compliance perspective, still cannot go for cloud or whatever, I have seen that. I think you have a problem because it's going to be super hard for you to adopt anything, any new kind of technology that automates obviously. However, the reality is also a bit more nuanced. Why? So in the pre-AI, in the pre-Gen AI, yet in the AI machine learning days, 5 to 10 years ago, right, when we all did predictive stuff and analytics and classifications, there you had a real problem if your data was shit. Pardon my French, but if your data wasn't great, because you would need to be basing everything on good data, otherwise the models don't train well. Now, I personally see Gen AI actually as an on-ramp to great data quality. Because in reality, you don't really need to have humans anymore entering your data. This fantastic new use case, which is already so easy to deploy for all industries, from sales stuff to logistics, operational processes, is hey, an AI enters all the data from your emails into your system, and it's going to be perfect. It cleans it, it looks up if that customer is still whatever on the internet. It will do that all automatically for you. So I think you can get to clearer data, better master data, better operational data with Gen AI. And that also means that, I think you can do more with it down the road. However, again, if your systems, you can't integrate them, then that's a problem. I've recently seen a transport management system provider, for example, in our industry, say every API call costs 25 cents, which is, of course, a pricing model from probably even before the 90s. So yeah, that's prohibitive to innovation. And I think you need to think about whether you still want to be around in that case in 10 years, probably even
Well,
five.
not only this, you also need to make damn sure as the person responsible for choosing the provider, right, that they are actually ready for that age. The pricing models,
Yeah.
the way they're thinking about this, are they designing AI first, or are they not? Like that's a
I think
fascinating.
most incumbents are not yet. And I think it's okay because if you have a big software, you're a bit slower with things naturally because of lots of surface area. And I also think it's okay because it's not yet 100% clear what the systems of record, what the platforms will look like. I was in San Francisco recently and I saw a really, really fantastic innovative design of a system of record, which was purely text-based. So really purely text-based. You had sort of, it was a transport management system for customers of freight forwarders that ship things, let's say a big manufacturing company that has lots of transports. And you'd have your key entities, transports, bookings, etc., maybe clients and so on. But every single item in this collection is just a text file. And I liked it a lot because in reality, we crammed everything into relational databases, so Excel
Mm.
style, right, data models, tables. But very often, I see that the notes field, the comments field, is the most beloved and most used field
Yeah.
because you just, no matter how good your data model is, you cannot put things like, yeah, the truck's going to go to Göttingen, but then unload 10% in Uelzen. Yeah, you cannot put
Mhm.
that into that. There's no data model that supports that. And now that was a really innovative design. And maybe it's going to look like that, but we also don't know. So the future is going to be super exciting.
Ah, that's a good way. That's for sure. Um, with Zauber, you're essentially providing the tools that allow freight forwarders to really structure the things along the value stream that were formerly, error-prone human operations. Is that a good way of summarizing the Zauber of Zauber?
We are, yes, in a way, yes, yes. You can say that. We are automate. I think, we think that automation in this business, we don't do it for the sake of automation. We do it because we think that you can offer better customer service when you run your best process every time. You can retain customers longer. You can win more business if you respond really, really quickly and really excellent every single time. I mean, think about calling telecom, and every time someone would be motivated, happy that you're calling, competent. How crazy would that be? We'd all be telecom customers. And not saying that it's not that people in freight forwarding are not, but I mean, there's just typically I find that people are really happy with their jobs and they love their jobs, but they're also sometimes just overwhelmed, right? There's times of crunch. There's sometimes language barriers, time zone differences. In China, people are already in the pub. Um, well earned. It's 9 p.m., so we can't get anything done there anymore. And so I think automation will help a lot along customer service productivity, also margin retention and revenue management. And that's why we believe that AI is a big opportunity in logistics.
Last question. This does have implications on how people do their job, right? Like it will no longer be dependent on the artisanal knowledge and mastery of somebody who's done it for a decade. Um, I wouldn't say, you're turning the person that has before built the car in a 100-hour fight between that human and the machines into factory lines, right? So, it's not, we're not talking about digital factories, but it will have political implications. I presume people need to change, the job functions change. What does that do to the organizations that are taking that serious?
Yeah, that's a point we would all should all think about more. And I think many things we'll have to see. I'm not convinced at this point. These are just my hypotheses, but I'm not convinced at this point that you will necessarily see job loss. Why? Because the human nature has always been such that we always wanted more. We wanted to eat more, ship more. I mean, buy better products, buy better healthcare, fly further for vacation, and have longer vacations. So, I think we will always find more things to do because there's an endless appetite in human nature for economic growth. I do think that roles will change to that same point because you just don't have to type 15 pack items from a packing list or commercial invoice into your TMS anymore. And you will have probably more creative, more high stakes tasks to do in the future than that. And I think that people who are not willing, unfortunately, to adapt their work from that perspective, I think they will probably face at one point challenges because then they will be under pressure. Yeah, that's I think what I'm convinced of. And also, I think what we can learn from lessons from the past. We probably have a higher employment rate than at the Ford days. And at the same time, I think there will be shifts. Lastly, I think what we need to say is because to a degree, I live in Europe, and I know probably people that listen to you are global, but I think because we live here, I think it's super important that there's going to be a next industrial revolution. And I think the US and China, they're very much at the forefront of it and requires massive capital expenditure. I don't see the same level of awareness at a societal level in Europe or probably other parts of the world around the fact that mm, it will happen, what's happening, what will happen, what we could do or need to do in order to defend our economy, in that sense, also defend our society and the values we live for. And I would wish that maybe that's something we imminently take a bit more seriously here in Europe and where people act a bit harder.
Yeah, that's a gloomy way of coming to an end here. But I agree, right? Like we're sailing into a massive storm, and it feels a little bit like Titanic, where the jazz band keeps playing, and everybody thinks it's okay to talk about in Germany the current way they're thinking about retirement age and packages, and it feels
Yeah.
like there are a lot more things they should talk about rather.
To continue the metaphor, maybe people already feel that something might be happening. Maybe that they feel that we've struck an iceberg, but they decide to fight over the last bottles of champagne at the bar rather than focusing on what really matters. That's at least how sort of politics feels like at the moment when you see the polls for the right wing parties.
Good vibes only. Eric, thank you very much.